Never again. It's a phrase that all of us do, or at least should, understand. And if you've ever visited one of the camps where the phrase was first uttered, it hits particularly hard. Walking the hallowed grounds and silent buildings where so many innocents lost their lives cannot help but to instill a sense that this was a moment of profound impact, a moment that should have been a turning point in the history of mankind. Never again was uttered amidst a war that killed over 80 million people. Never again was uttered amidst a war where civilians were targeted without mercy, from the empty ruins of London neighborhoods to the unspeakable horrors in the streets of Nanking, to the camps of those plain, unassuming, now quiet buildings. Never again was uttered in a war that ended with a weapon so horrible it made the next war unthinkable. Never again continued to be uttered in the quiet of the Cold War that followed, as mankind stood on the brink not just of its own annihilation, but of the very world upon which it stood. Never again was not just a call to moral action. Never again was a realization that if mankind continued on the path it was on, there might not be anyone left to proclaim, this time, never again. Yet when the world looks upon the ruins of Gaza, it is now apparent that never again has failed to outlive the very generation that first uttered it. Never again has become, simply, again. The purpose of this two-part video is to explain why never again has become, simply, again. First, we must address those who deny that never again has become, simply, again. Those who contest that what is happening in Gaza is, in fact, a genocide. That is the purpose of this video. In the second video, we will attempt to explain why. Why some of the descendants of the very people who survived never again chose to make it again. Those who defend the acts of Israel and Gaza argue that it is, simply, the unhappy circumstances of war. Did we not, they argue, do the same thing in World War II? To understand why the Israeli tactics in Gaza amount to a genocide, you have to first understand how aerial warfare has evolved over the last few decades. Indeed, Israel supporters are correct in that the Allies did directly target civilians during World War II. What they leave out is the fact that it didn't work. World War II was the first war in which air power was a significant, indeed decisive aspect of war. There were, of course, airplanes in World War I, but air power was still in its infancy in 1919. By the 1930s, air forces had grown massively in size, and bombing raids could have hundreds of aircraft in them. For instance, in 1942, one British raid over Cologne included over 1,000 bombers. All the major air powers attempted terror bombing in World War II. That is, they directly attacked civilian populations. Even when military targets were chosen, the dense population surrounding them and the lack of accuracy of World War II munitions meant that many of these raids were, in effect, direct attacks on the civilian population. The goal of these attacks was to break the will of the opposing population by inflicting mass casualties. The hope was that it could end the war without having to land troops in the enemy homeland. But it didn't work. The Blitz failed to break the will of the British people. The firebombing of Dresden failed to break the will of the German people, as the firebombing of Tokyo failed to break the will of the Japanese people. The only arguable case for terror bombing being an effective tool of warfare are the nuclear attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Though even here, historians debate the relative importance of these two attacks, as compared to other factors, such as the Soviets joining the war, and the fact that the entire Japanese Navy was, by that time, resting on the bottom of the Pacific. Not only is terror bombing ineffective in breaking the will of the population, but it is also counterproductive to military aims. A city that's been turned to rubble makes for excellent defensive positions, and a population that's been brutalized is more likely to resist an occupier. Indeed, the fact that terror bombing doesn't work is one of the hidden blessings of World War II, for modern warfare would be much more brutal if it had. The lessons from World War II, lessons which were perfected in the 1991 Gulf War, demonstrate 4 valid uses of air power when it comes to striking ground targets. The first of these is to degrade the enemy infrastructure. That is, to attack strategic targets such as airfields, air defenses, command and communication buildings, and factories which produce arms or their precursors. During the Battle of Britain, the Luftwaffe nearly destroyed the Royal Air Force by focusing its efforts on destroying British airfields, attacking the defending British fighters not just in the air, but on the ground. It was only the folly of Small Mustache Man that saved the British. For when he diverted German attacks onto London, beginning the terror bombing campaign known as the Blitz, he granted the RAF Fighter Command the reprieve it needed to recover. These lessons were perfected by the 1990s in Operation Desert Storm. The initial wave of attacks, using precision munitions, devastated Iraqi air defenses, airfields, and command and control facilities. And the use of precision munitions avoided the kind of civilian casualties seen in World War II raids. It was not just a more moral way to fight a war, it was a superior way to fight a war. One that didn't inflame the enemy population or create ideal ambush points for enemy soldiers. This campaign was so successful that when the United States went back into Iraq in 2003, the Iraqi population put up little resistance. It was only when the United States began a prolonged and misguided nation-building campaign that the population turned on their occupiers. When it comes to Gaza, Hamas is a terrorist organization that won an election, making it a mix of a guerrilla-style military force and the legitimate government of the region. While there may have been some legitimate military infrastructure targets, these would have been eliminated within weeks, if not days, of the October 7, 2023 attack. They cannot constitute a justification for the continued, relentless bombing of Gaza. The second valid use of air power is to attack the enemy's supply lines, and the third is to attack troop concentrations. The Allied invasion of France provides a textbook example here. By this time in the war, the Allies had control of the skies over France. When they invaded Normandy on June 6, 1944, Allied air power relentlessly attacked German troop formations and supply lines. The German plan was to counterattack any invasion force with several tank divisions kept in reserve. But with Allied air power relentlessly attacking every bridge, road, supply line, and troop concentration, these counterattacks fizzled quickly. Moreover, it is no accident that Germany timed its last offensive in the Western Front, the Battle of the Bulge, to coincide with bad weather which grounded Allied planes. When the weather cleared, Allied air power again relentlessly attacked German troops and supplies, ending Germany's last chance to defend itself from the West. These lessons were again perfected in Desert Storm. Once the coalition had obtained air dominance, it could mercilessly pound all Iraqi supply lines and troop formations, culminating in the infamous Highway of Death, where Iraqi soldiers retreating from Kuwait were completely vulnerable to the planes circling overhead. But turning to Gaza, both troop concentrations and supply lines are rare, if not non-existent things for a guerrilla force operating in an urban environment. This is not a conventional war, and it does not have either front lines or supply lines. Indeed, Gaza is entirely surrounded and isolated from any supply lines by Israel, being effectively under siege even prior to the October 7th attacks. There would be few, if any, of these target types in Gaza. The fourth legitimate use of air power is to use aircraft as, in essence, flying artillery. Thus, anything on the battlefield you might shoot with something else, you can bomb with an airplane. This would include things such as counter-battery fire, i.e. shooting at the enemy's artillery pieces and rocket launchers, directly targeting military vehicles or troops, and close air support for friendly troops. These uses would be, for the most part, the only real legitimate use of air power in Gaza. But one only need look at the pictures from Gaza or read the casualty figures to understand that Israel is not limiting itself to legitimate targets such as these. Instead, it is clear that Israel is waging a terror bombing campaign against the population of Gaza itself. Gaza is not the successor to Desert Storm. Gaza is the successor to the Blitz. To further emphasize this distinction, let's look at what a legitimate invasion of Gaza would have looked like if Israel was indeed only interested in defeating Hamas like it initially claimed. First, pictures such as this wouldn't exist. Conquest requires that you put an 18-year-old with a rifle on every street corner. Indeed, it is a maxim of modern warfare that no war has ever been won by air power alone. Air power simply doesn't win wars. Infantry wins wars. Air power supports the infantry. If Israel was serious about defeating Hamas, they'd send infantry to go street by street, house by house, and tunnel by tunnel, just like the Allies did in World War II or the United States did in Fallujah. You have to separate the enemy combatants from the civilian population and then destroy said combatants or force their surrender. That's far easier to do if you haven't turned the entire region into one big rubble pile. That's not what Israel has done. Instead, Israel has dropped bombs against a people with no air defenses and demolished buildings from the safety of their armored vehicles. Indeed, one need look no further than Israel's own casualty figures to see the truth of this. To quote the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, since the beginning of ground operations in the Gaza Strip on October 27, 2023, 451 soldiers have fallen in combat. The United States Central Intelligence Agency estimated that Hamas had between 20,000 and 30,000 fighters prior to October 7th. If Israel was actually attempting to engage these forces in direct combat, it would have suffered far more military casualties and inflicted far fewer civilian casualties than it has. While there is no credible breakdowns in the numbers of civilians killed as opposed to combatants, something which shouldn't be a surprise given Israel's indiscriminate campaign, the first independent analysis of war casualties estimates that over half of the casualties are women, children, and the elderly. That amounts to a loss of between 28,000 and 42,000 innocents. Thus, Israel is clearly engaged in a terror bombing campaign in the Gaza Strip, one designed to inflict casualties directly upon the civilian population. The next question is, does this constitute a genocide? To answer that, there are two United Nations definitions to consider. The first comes from Article 2 of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, which states as follows. In the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. 1. Killing members of the group. 2. Causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. 3. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. 4. Imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. And 5. Forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. The crime of genocide therefore has two components. The physical component is the 5 acts listed on screen. The mens rea, or guilty mind, is to do these acts with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. The physical elements are easiest to establish. Elements 1 and 2 are established by the terror bombing campaign itself and contribute to elements 3 and 4. Elements 3 and 4 are further established by other Israeli actions, including limiting food and humanitarian relief into the Gaza Strip, a practice which predates October 7, 2023. Indeed, it has been ongoing since Hamas was elected, and this is despite credible allegations that no less than Benjamin Netanyahu himself wanted Hamas elected to divide the Palestinians from Gaza from the Palestinians in the West Bank. One of the most striking examples of Israel's genocidal acts is its repeated attacks on healthcare facilities. In a statement dated May 22, 2025, the World Health Organization states that it has recorded 28 attacks on healthcare facilities in Gaza during the past week, and 697 attacks since October 2023. Further, the World Health Organization states that only 19 of Gaza Strip's 36 hospitals remain operational, including one hospital providing basic care for the remaining patients still inside the hospital, and are struggling under severe supply shortages, lack of health workers, persistent insecurity, and a surge of casualties, all while staff work in impossible conditions. Of the 19 hospitals, 12 provide a variety of health services, while the rest are only able to provide basic emergency care. At least 94% of all hospitals in the Gaza Strip are damaged or destroyed. Similarly, the OCHA, the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, reports that 92% of Gaza's homes have been destroyed or damaged, 69% of all structures have been destroyed or damaged, and 1.9 million people, or 90% of Gaza's population, has been displaced and are homeless. Worse, 96% of women and children are not meeting their nutritional requirements. In other words, they are starving. In fact, of the 5 acts listed in Article 2, only number 5, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group, is missing. And it appears to be missing solely because Israel chooses to kill the children of Gaza rather than transfer them. Before turning to the mens rea, or guilty mind aspect, let's first consider another relevant definition, that of ethnic cleansing. While there is no formal definition of ethnic cleansing as there is for genocide, the final report of a United Nations Commission of Experts on the Yugoslavia War defined ethnic cleansing as a purposeful policy designed by one ethnic or religious group to remove by violent and terror-inspiring means the civilian population of another ethnic or religious group from certain geographic areas. When you look at what Israel and its supporters say about their intentions, a topic we'll get to momentarily, it more closely fits the definition of ethnic cleansing. Yet this is a distinction without a difference. Entire populations don't willingly abandon their homeland. The only way to induce such drastic response is by doing the same 5 acts which constitute genocide. In fact, no one summarizes the link between ethnic cleansing and genocide better than Israeli settler extremist Daniela Weiss. When asked by a BBC reporter why the population of Gaza would voluntarily leave Gaza, she replied, "The normal people don't want to live in hell." The normal people don't want to live in hell. Thus, it matters little whether the intent is ethnic cleansing or outright genocide. The acts, the atrocities, are just the same. In other words, ethnic cleansing is an act of genocide. Ethnic cleansing is the intent to destroy a part of a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group in order to induce the rest to voluntarily leave. This brings us to the mens rea, the guilty mind. The intent to do these acts in order to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. First, the scale of the devastation, and its lack of any military justification, is alone enough to establish Israel's intent. The Israeli military is a professional organization. Its leaders train with other Western militaries and understand how air power has evolved over time. Further, Israel has employed proper military strategies in the past, such as during the 1967 war. When Israel launched its surprise attack, it didn't bomb Cairo, it didn't destroy homes and hospitals, it struck the Egyptian Air Force. Why? Because that's how you win wars. You achieve air dominance first. Then you use that air dominance to destroy the enemy army on the ground. Again, terror bombing doesn't work. NATO air-land battle doctrine works. Beyond the inescapable fact that Israel is waging a terror bombing campaign that has no military justification, there is no shortage of other evidence for Israel's intent. Take the following quote from former Knesset member Moshe Feiglin. "Every child in Gaza is the enemy. We need to occupy Gaza and settle it, and not a single Gazan child will be left there. There is no other victory." Similarly, the deputy speaker of the Knesset, Nissim Vaturi, states, Now we all have one common goal: erasing Gaza from the face of the earth. Those who are unable will be replaced. Israeli Minister for National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, is shockingly open about his intent to target non-combatants. To be clear, when they say that Hamas needs to be eliminated, it also means those who sing, those who support, and those who distribute candy. All of these are terrorists. In a similar vein, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant states, "I have ordered a complete siege on the Gaza Strip. There will be no electricity, no food, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals, and we are acting accordingly." Speaking to Radio Kol Barema, Israeli Knesset member and Minister for Heritage Machai Elayahu voiced his objection to humanitarian aid in Gaza, stating that there is no such thing as uninvolved civilians in Gaza. In the same interview, Elayahu stated that dropping a nuclear bomb on Gaza was one way to deal with the issue. But perhaps the starkest example of genocidal rhetoric comes from none other than Benjamin Netanyahu himself. Israel's prime minister invoked biblical genocide when he stated, "You must remember what Amalek has done to you," says our Holy Bible, and we do remember. The Bible verse he is referring to is 1 Samuel 15:3. "Now go, attack the Amalekites, and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys." Evidence of genocide is not limited to the statements of Israeli politicians. Recently, the Israeli newspaper Haaretz reported that IDF soldiers and officers admitted that they were ordered to deliberately fire on Palestinians at aid distribution sites in Gaza. One soldier reportedly described the scene as a killing field, stating that our form of communication is gunfire. Further, genocide has broad public support among the Israeli population. A survey conducted by Israeli scholar Tamir Sorek, a professor at Pennsylvania State University, found that 82% of Israeli Jews wanted to expel all Gazans from the Gaza Strip, and 47% supported killing all Gazans in areas occupied by Israel. More recently, Israel Defense Minister Israel Katz has advanced plans to build a humanitarian camp on the ruins of the city of Rafah, the southernmost city in the Gaza Strip. Plans call for the entire population of Gaza to eventually be housed here, and once they enter, they will not be allowed to leave. If you think this sounds exactly like a concentration camp, you would be correct. Even former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert describes the plan as a concentration camp. No word yet on whether the population of Gaza will be transported via rail car. But even that isn't enough for Katz, who has also vowed to implement a plan for the immigration of the population of Gaza. This is the most overt admission of genocidal intent since Small Mustache Man wrote of his need for Lebensraum. Sadly, there is little room to dispute the claim that Israel is, in fact, committing a genocide. Israel's military campaign is a terror bombing campaign aimed directly at the civilians of Gaza. Israel's military campaign has no military justification within the principles of contemporary military strategy. Israel's military campaign, combined with its campaign to limit even the most basic humanitarian aid, constitutes a violation of 4 of the 5 acts which constitute the legal definition of genocide. And finally, the direct, genocidal rhetoric from Israel's public officials, sentiments which are reflected in the attitudes of its population, sentiments which are reflected in Israel's policy towards Gaza, are more than sufficient to establish Israel's mens rea, its intent to commit genocide in Gaza. Never again has become, sadly, again.